The pre-dawn chill bit at my exposed knuckles, a familiar sting that meant another shift was truly underway. My breath plumed in the frigid air, dissolving almost immediately into the inky expanse above. I gripped the steering wheel of the sanitation truck, the worn plastic warm beneath my gloved hands, the engine a low, rumbling beast that vibrated through the floorboards and up into my bones. 5 years on this route, 5 years of the same stops, the same smells, the same endless grind, all for one purpose, that tuition fund. Every clanking bin, every heavy lift, every early morning hum of the engine was another brick laid in the foundation of my child's future. It was a simple, powerful motivation, sharper than any blade, cutting through the exhaustion and the grime. My route started in the industrial sector, a maze of warehouses and loading docks that were mostly quiet at this hour, save for the occasional delivery truck rumbling in the distance. The streetlights here were sparse, casting long, fractured shadows that danced with the rhythm of my truck's passing. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of diesel and the faint, underlying sweetness of decay, the perfume of my profession. I knew these streets better than my own reflection, every pothole, every overflowing dumpster, every perfectly placed bin. Meticulous was the only way to describe my approach. A missed bin meant a complaint meant a reprimand, and a reprimand meant a potential hit to my hours, to our savings. I couldn't afford a single misstep. Today, my schedule took me down a less traveled access road, one that snaked around the back of an abandoned factory and up a slight incline to a small, isolated clearing. This particular stop was usually a quick one, just a single, oversized commercial bin serving a rarely used storage facility. The bin sat directly beneath a towering metal structure, a skeletal finger reaching for the sky, a cell phone tower. Lately, there'd been a lot of activity around it, a cell phone tower maintenance. Signal dead zone investigation crew had been in and out for weeks. I'd seen their utility vans, heard the distant whine of their equipment, but mostly I'd just enjoyed the relative peace of the area. No busy sidewalks, no impatient drivers. Just me, the truck, and the hum of the tower itself, which today felt strangely muted. My eyes, accustomed to the dim light, scanned the area. The maintenance crews usually left the place tidier than this. Scattered across the ground near the bin were a few discarded energy drink cans, some crumpled fast food wrappers, and a coil of black cable that looked like it had been snipped haphazardly. Standard litter, nothing I hadn't seen 1,000 times. But as I reached for the bin's heavy lid, a flicker of something out of place caught my eye. Not in the bin, but perched precariously on its very edge, half hidden by a loose plastic bag. It was small, no bigger than my fist, and wrapped tightly in what looked like a piece of faded, patterned cloth, almost like a fragment of an old curtain. The fabric was a dull floral design, a stark contrast to the grimy industrial surroundings. What truly snagged my attention, though, was the way it was wrapped. It looked like a package, abandoned. My first thought was a child's forgotten toy, maybe something precious. My hand, still gloved, reached out, curiosity overriding my usual don't-touch protocol for anything outside the bin. My fingers brushed against a hard, unyielding surface within the cloth. It wasn't soft like a plush toy. It was rigid. A strange, coppery smell, faint but distinct, wafted from it, mingling with the general stench of the bin. It wasn't the usual rotting food smell. This was sharper, almost metallic, like old pennies left out in the rain, but with an underlying sweetness that made my stomach clench. A prickle of unease started to crawl up my neck. My eyes scanned the area again, looking for any other sign, any hint of who might have left it, but there was nothing. Just the silent tower, the empty factory, and the distant drone of the city. I hesitated, the weight of the small bundle pressing against my palm. My mind, usually so focused on the mechanics of the route, began to race. This wasn't just litter, this was placed. The meticulous wrapping, the careful positioning on the bin's lip, the strange, sickly sweet smell. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a sudden, frantic rhythm. Something felt profoundly wrong. I thought of the cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation crew, of the odd hours they kept, the way their vans had always been parked just out of sight. Had one of them left this? It seemed too personal, too deliberately hidden for a work crew to just abandon. I imagined unwrapping it, revealing something horrific. My mind flashed to news reports, to stories of people finding things they wished they hadn't. My child's face, bright with expectation, flashed through my thoughts. Every penny I earned was for that. Getting involved, calling the authorities, would mean questions, delays, maybe even losing days of work. My meticulously planned life, the one I was building brick by painstaking brick, could shatter in an instant. This wasn't my problem. My job was to collect the trash, not to solve mysteries. I could just toss it into the compactor, let the hydraulic press erase it, and forget I ever saw it. No one would ever know. My fingers tightened around the package. The metallic fear coated my tongue, a bitter taste. What if this wasn't just something? What if it was evidence? What if this was the last piece of a puzzle? A clue that someone desperately didn't want found, and I was holding it. The image of my child's trusting eyes morphed into a silent plea. Could I truly walk away, knowing I might be destroying a chance at justice, simply to protect my own carefully constructed peace? I stared at the wrapped bundle, the decision a heavy stone in my gut. My gaze drifted to the distant city lights, a shimmering promise of the life I was fighting for. And then I looked back at the bin, at the unassuming package, and knew with a sickening certainty that I couldn't just throw it away. I gripped the steering wheel of the sanitation truck, the worn plastic warm beneath my gloved hand, but the warmth did little to thaw the ice that had begun to form in my gut. The package, still tucked carefully in the passenger footwell, wrapped in a fresh, thick plastic bag I'd scavenged from my own supplies, seemed to hum with an awful energy. It was a dark, silent passenger, heavy with a secret I never wanted to know. My mind replayed the moment, the way the light had caught the edge, the texture beneath my glove. I could still feel the faint, sickly sweet scent clinging to my nostrils, cutting through the usual urban perfume of exhaust and damp earth. Every instinct screamed at me to just dump it, to let it disappear into the endless churn of the landfill, to preserve the quiet, predictable rhythm of my life. But the image of Alina's face, of her bright, hopeful eyes when she talked about college, solidified my resolve. I couldn't ignore it, not with that kind of weight on my conscience. I steered the truck off my usual route, ignoring the nagging internal clock that tracked my efficiency. I needed signal, a reliable spot where the call wouldn't drop. My phone was old, battered, its antenna often temperamental. I remembered a small service road, a gravel track leading to the base of a cell phone tower maintenance signal dead zone investigation area where technicians always had full bars. The tower itself loomed ahead, a skeletal metal giant against the brightening sky, its red warning lights blinking rhythmically like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Pulling off the main road, the tires crunched on the loose stones. I killed the engine. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the numbers. This call wouldn't just report a find. It would tear a hole in the fabric of my quiet existence. I took a deep breath, the cold air scraping my throat, tasting faintly of ozone from the tower. Then I dialed. The dispatcher's voice, calm and practiced, was a stark contrast to the frantic beat of my own pulse. I tried to explain, to make sense of what I'd found, the careful concealment, the sheer wrongness of it. "It's not just trash," I stammered, my voice rougher than I intended. "It was hidden, deliberately, and feels heavy." There was a pause on the other end, a polite skepticism. I could almost hear her picturing some discarded, waterlogged suitcase. She gave me instructions, told me to stay put. The wait stretched. Minutes felt like hours. The sun was truly up now, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange. I watched the road, every distant glint of chrome, every approaching engine sound, making my stomach clench. Finally, a patrol car appeared, its blue and red lights flashing discreetly, not yet blaring sirens. A uniformed officer, younger than me, approached, his expression a mix of caution and mild annoyance. He listened, arms crossed, as I recounted the discovery again, pointing to the truck. He peered into the cab, his gaze lingering on the wrapped package. His skepticism was almost palpable, a thick, invisible wall between us. "You're sure this isn't just a particularly unpleasant piece of refuse, sir?" he asked, his voice flat. Before I could answer, another car pulled up, unmarked, and a man emerged. He was older, his face a roadmap of hard-won experience, eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He introduced himself as a detective. He didn't waste time with pleasantries, just a curt nod, his gaze sweeping from me to the truck, then to the young officer. "Let's see what our sanitation expert has for us," he said, his tone neutral, but I detected a flicker of something, a spark of professional curiosity. With the detective's permission, I carefully unwrapped a corner of the plastic, revealing just enough of the original packaging. The detective knelt, his expression shifting from detached observation to a grim intensity. More vehicles arrived quickly, a swarm of activity. The area around the cell phone tower maintenance road transformed into a makeshift crime scene. Yellow tape materialized, stretching between the sparse trees, sealing off the world I knew from this new, horrifying reality. A team of forensic specialists, moving with a practiced, almost ritualistic efficiency, began their work. They wore white suits, their faces obscured by masks like silent, methodical ghosts. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices barely audible over the crackle of their radios. I watched, numb, as they confirmed what I already knew in my gut. The package wasn't just heavy, it contained human remains. The lead forensic technician, his voice calm despite the gruesome nature of his findings, described the meticulous effort taken to conceal it. The specific types of materials used, designed to withstand the rigors of waste processing. Whoever did this knew the system, he murmured, his eyes flicking to me, or at least they tried to game it. The detective pulled me aside, his voice low. "Carlos," he said, using my name for the first time. A subtle shift that acknowledged my unexpected role. "Your perspective on this, it's invaluable. You know the routes, the collection points, the habits, things we wouldn't even think to look for." He wasn't asking, he was stating a fact. I was no longer just a witness. I was an unwilling guide, my expertise now a tool in a hunt I never wanted to join. "Your perspective on this, it's invaluable. Things we wouldn't even think to look for." The detective's words hung in the air, heavy with a new kind of responsibility. My stomach tightened. Invaluable. That wasn't a word usually applied to me, Carlos, the guy who hauled away the city's forgotten bits. I felt a strange mix of pride and dread. My carefully constructed world, built on predictable routes and the rhythm of the truck, was officially crumbling. The interrogation room was a sterile box. White walls, a single metal table, 4 chairs. The air conditioning hummed a low, constant note, almost a whisper, making my skin prickle with cold despite the rising heat outside. A faint, cloying scent of stale coffee and industrial cleaner clung to everything. The detective sat opposite me, his gaze steady, while a younger officer, notebook open, perched to my left. "Tell us again, Carlos," the detective began, his voice calm, "about the initial discovery, every detail, the bin, the street, the time." I took a deep breath, the metallic tang of fear coating my tongue. "It was the usual Tuesday pickup, Elm Street, just after 7. Bin 3C, the one by the old bakery, you know, the one that always smells like burnt sugar and yeast, even now that it's just a laundromat." I could feel the texture of the bin's rough plastic against my gloved hand, the familiar weight as I tilted it. It felt off, too heavy for what was visible. The younger officer scribbled, "Too heavy? Yeah, like someone had packed it tight. Most folks just toss bags in. This felt dense, like bricks, but soft." I remembered the strain in my shoulders, the way the bin groaned. Then when it went into the compactor, that's when I saw it, the bundle. It was wrapped in heavy-duty tarpaulin, taped tight, not your usual garbage bag. My mind replayed the scene, the sickening thud as the bundle hit the compactor, the sudden, horrifying reveal as the hydraulics ripped the tarp. The coppery smell had hit me first, even over the diesel fumes, sharp and undeniable. My hands, still calloused from years of gripping levers and pushing bins, felt suddenly delicate, too aware of the horror they'd witnessed. "And you stopped the compactor immediately?" the detective pressed. "Course I did," I replied, my voice rising slightly. "No one wants to see that, especially not when you're just doing your job." I ran a hand over my jaw. "I've seen some things, you know. People throw out all kinds of crazy, but this was different." The detective nodded slowly. "Different how?" "Deliberate," I answered, the word coming out with more force than I intended. "Most trash is accidental or careless. This was meant to be hidden, buried deep, and the way it was wrapped, like someone wanted it to vanish without a trace." They asked about the specific route, the usual residence, anything unusual. I recounted every detail I could conjure. The new car that appeared on Maple Street, the overflowing recycling bin on Oak that usually wasn't, the oddly quiet house on Pine. I talked about the rhythm of the neighborhood, the subtle changes only someone who saw it every day would notice. The way Mrs. Henderson always put out her bins exactly at 6 a.m., or how the young couple on Willow always had pizza boxes on Wednesdays. It was my trash talk, the unspoken language of waste. "And on Elm Street?" the younger officer asked. Anything specific near bin 3C? I closed my eyes, trying to conjure the specific street corner. The laundromat, a perpetually peeling mural of soap bubbles on its wall. The vacant lot next to it, overgrown with weeds that brushed against the chain-link fence. No, nothing immediately obvious, I responded, then paused. A flicker of something, a memory nudging at the edge of my consciousness. Actually, there was a utility van, parked a bit further down near the old junction box. It wasn't one of ours, and it stayed there for a couple of hours, which was weird. Usually they're in and out. The detective leaned forward. A utility van? What kind? Couldn't tell you the company. Generic white. But it had one of those extendable ladders on top, you know, the kind for reaching high places. My mind raced, trying to pull more details. I remember thinking it was odd because it wasn't doing anything. No workers around, just sitting there. The younger officer looked at the detective. Could be related to the cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation in that sector. They've had crews out for weeks trying to pinpoint the interference. My ears perked up. Signal dead zone. I'd heard about it from other drivers. Yeah, that's it, I exclaimed. I remember a few days earlier, I saw a similar van, same kind of ladder, near the big tower just off Elm, closer to the highway. Figured they were working on that. A small seed of doubt began to sprout. There was eye-connecting dots that weren't there. A utility van could be anything. A dead zone could be a coincidence. But the sheer deliberateness of the package in my compactor still gnawed at me. Carlos, the detective said, his voice dropping slightly. You mentioned the bundle was taped tight. What kind of tape? Heavy-duty, silver duct tape, layers of it. I rubbed my thumb and forefinger together, recalling the stickiness, the strength. Industrial grade, not your household stuff. That detail, combined with the utility van near the dead zone, suddenly clicked into place with something else I'd been hearing on my route. Over the past few weeks, a strange pattern had emerged. I'd noticed an unusual number of discarded industrial-grade duct tape rolls in bins from completely different, seemingly unrelated sectors of my route. Not just one or two, but sometimes half a dozen, all used up, all the same heavy silver kind. I dismissed it as a new construction crew or something, but the sheer spread of it didn't fit. It was like a scattered trail. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Wait, I added, cutting off the younger officer mid-sentence. The tape. I've been seeing that kind of tape everywhere lately. Not on Elm Street, not just there, all over my route. Used up rolls. In bins from the warehouse district, then further out, near the abandoned factory complex, and even some near the docks. Always the same heavy-duty silver stuff. The detective's eyebrows raised, a silent acknowledgement of my unexpected insight. He didn't dismiss it. He just looked at me, his eyes sharp. The disparate pieces of trash talk were no longer just random discards. They were beginning to form a picture, a scattered, unsettling narrative. And I was the only one who had seen all the chapters. The game had changed. I was no longer just a witness. I was part of the puzzle. The detective's eyebrows raised, a silent acknowledgement of my unexpected insight, and I was caught in it. I have an eye, Carlos, the detective said, his voice low. Almost a rumble in the small, stale interview room. A specific kind of eye. He leaned back, then forward again, resting his elbows on the table. The fluorescent lights hummed above us, a high-pitched whine that usually blended into the background, but now grated on my nerves. I could taste the faint metallic tang of fear on my tongue, or maybe it was just the lingering scent of stale coffee and desperation in the room. I see what doesn't belong, I managed. My voice a little rough. My mind was still replaying the scraps, the patterns, the sheer audacity of it hiding in plain sight. It was the kind of thinking I used every day, spotting a discarded wallet amongst banana peels or a loose hubcap about to become road debris. But this was different. This was deliberate. The detective nodded slowly. That's what we need. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy and expectant. We've got another site. A dead zone. Looks like someone tried to jam comms, cover tracks. Usual suspects, but the cleanup. It's too clean. Almost like they wanted us to see the jamming, but miss something else. He pushed a folded map across the table. My eyes traced the red circle marked near the outskirts of the city, a place I knew only as a patchwork of overgrown industrial lots and neglected utility structures. We're calling it a cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation. My stomach tightened. Missed shifts meant missed pay. Missed pay meant less for my child's tuition. The numbers, usually a comforting rhythm in my head, now felt like a suffocating weight. But the detective's gaze was unwavering, pulling me into a current I wasn't sure I could swim against. He needed my eye. And I, foolishly or not, felt a strange pull to see this through. An hour later, I was standing on a patch of uneven gravel, the wind whipping dust into my face. At the designated cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation site. The air here tasted of dry earth and distant exhaust fumes. The concrete foundation of the tower rose like a skeletal finger against the bruised afternoon sky. A small team of investigators, dressed in their official dark jackets, moved methodically, their voices hushed, almost reverent, as if not to disturb the secrets the ground held. I stuck close to the detective, trying to blend in. But I felt like a stray dog in a kennel full of pedigrees. My work boots crunched on loose rocks, a stark contrast to the quiet tread of their specialized footwear. I scanned the ground. This wasn't my usual route, but the principles were the same. What was out of place? What had been disturbed? The detective pointed to a scorched patch of earth near the base of the tower. That's where they torched some equipment, tried to melt it down to slag. The smell of burnt plastic and copper still lingered, acrid and sharp even days later. But my gaze drifted past the obvious char marks. Something glinted near a clump of dry weeds. Not metal, not glass. A dull, almost organic sheen. I pulled it out. It was a piece of high-density composite material, maybe the size of my thumb, not quite melted, just softened and deformed by the heat, like a forgotten toy left too close to a fire. This wasn't standard consumer-grade plastic. This was engineered, and it had been deliberately, meticulously buried under a thin layer of topsoil right at the edge of the scorch marks, almost as an afterthought or a misplaced piece. "This," I replied, holding it out to the detective. "This isn't from the comms gear." My fingers traced the smooth, tough surface. It felt like something meant to withstand immense pressure, not just a discarded shell from a transmitter. And the smell. It carried a faint, almost imperceptible chemical scent, like something industrial, but not a scent I recognized from my daily rounds of ordinary waste. The detective took it, turning it over in his gloved hand. His eyes narrowed. "I rest sure, positive, the equipment they burned, that's cheap, off-the-shelf stuff. This is different, too strong, too light for its density." I knew the feel of different materials, the weight, the way they broke down. This wasn't the kind of thing you'd find in a typical cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation site. This was a weight that doesn't add up moment screaming in my head. The way this piece had been hidden, not completely, almost like it was meant to be found by someone with a specific eye, a breadcrumb or a warning. My skin prickled aware. Later that evening, the missed call from my supervisor was waiting. 2 missed shifts. "Carlos, we need you here." The voicemail said, tinged with a frustration that was barely veiled. "Things are piling up. My child's college fund, a mental spreadsheet I kept meticulously updated, now flashed red. Every hour I wasn't on the route, the deficit grew. The weight in my chest intensified. Walking home, the familiar streets felt different, sharper. I saw a neighbor, the old woman who always sat on her porch swing, watching the world go by. Our eyes met. She didn't wave, didn't offer her usual polite smile. Her gaze was long, assessing, filled with a quiet suspicion I hadn't seen before. It felt like a subtle warning, a ripple in the calm surface of my life. I doubted myself then, for the first time since this started. Was I doing the right thing, getting involved? There was the tuition money worth this gnawing sense of unease, this creeping fear that I was drawing a target on my own back. The small composite fragment was still in my pocket, a constant hard reminder. It wasn't just about a body in the trash anymore. It was about something bigger, something organized, something with resources to operate at a cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation site, and leave behind clues so deliberately subtle. And I, Carlos, the sanitation worker, was now tangled in its web. The hum of the fluorescent lights above did little to cut through the silence that pressed down, thick and heavy. In the small interview room, it smelled of stale coffee and something metallic, like old coins. I watched the detective, his face a mask I couldn't quite read, as he leaned forward, his voice a low rumble. "Carlos," he said, drawing out my name, "you missed 2 shifts. We know you're diligent. Your supervisor confirmed it. That's not like you." My pulse hammered against my ribs. He wasn't asking, he was stating, laying out the facts like stones on a path. He knew the numbers in my head, the tuition, the savings. The unspoken accusation hung in the air. Why would I risk that? Ice flooded my veins. I started. I wasn't feeling well after what I saw. He held up a hand, cutting me off. We understand that, but what you saw, or what you didn't see, is what we need to talk about. He pushed a photograph across the table. It wasn't the body, not directly. My stomach lurched anyway. It was a close-up of something small, resting on a patch of damp earth near where the discovery had been made. A piece of plastic. Not just any plastic, though. This was a specific kind of industrial-grade zip tie, thick and dark green, the sort used to bundle heavy cables, not something you'd find in a typical residential recycling bin. "Recognize it?" the detective asked, his voice deceptively soft. I stared at the photo, the tiny ridges on the plastic almost visible. My mind, usually so focused on the patterns of waste, the rhythm of the route, felt sluggish. I'd seen thousands of zip ties, but this one, it snagged something, a faint, almost forgotten detail. "It's industrial," I mumbled, stating the obvious. "Very, the kind you'd find around a construction site or perhaps cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation equipment." The detective's eyes sharpened, watching my reaction. He let the words hang there. The mandatory location, now part of the puzzle. Cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation. The phrase clicked in my head like a rusted gear finally turning, not the zip tie itself, but the context. Suddenly, I wasn't in the stale interview room anymore. I was back on my route, the rumble of the truck beneath me, the familiar stench of the city's discarded secrets. I remembered a specific series of bins on the edge of the industrial park, near the abandoned warehouse district. Not the regular residential stuff, but a set of commercial compactors. For months, maybe even a year, I'd noticed a peculiar pattern. Every few weeks, always the same compactor, always on a Thursday run, there would be a small, almost ceremonial bundle. Not trash, not really. It was always neat, always secured with exactly this kind of heavy-duty green zip tie. Sometimes it was a coil of unused cabling, sometimes a small, sealed plastic container, like a sample jar, but empty, always clean, always too clean for the bins it ended up in. I'd always dismissed it as some eccentric engineer's way of disposing of perfectly good but unneeded supplies, a habit, a quirk. "There's a compactor," I started, my voice hoarse, "on the industrial route, near the old processing plant. A few of them actually, one in particular. I've seen these before, not loose, always securing something. Small bundles, never anything important, just odd." The detective leaned back slightly, a flicker of something, maybe surprise, in his eyes. "Small bundles? What kind of bundles?" My mind raced, images flashing, smells of diesel and damp concrete. Cabling, sometimes empty containers, like the kind for specialized tools, always bundled with these green ties, never trash. It was like someone was leaving things out, but not for me to throw away. More like leaving a message. The words hung in the air, a revelation I hadn't even consciously understood until I spoke them. A message, not in the trash, but through the trash. My stomach twisted. The victim, the one whose body I'd found, had been involved in cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation. What if they were leaving these bundles as a way to communicate, a breadcrumb trail? Then the horrifying realization hit me. If the victim was using my route, using the very system I operated to send a message, then the perpetrator must have known it too. The body, the way it was left, it wasn't just disposal. It was a perversion of the message. The killer was using the victim's own communication channel against them, a final, gruesome punctuation mark. And I, the diligent sanitation worker, was the unwilling recipient of that final, deadly communication. The detective was looking at me differently now, not as a suspect, but as a key, a very exposed key. If the killer knew the victim used this method, they would also know that anyone who understood the pattern would become a threat. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was part of the message. I had just become the next target, the next thing to be cleaned away. The detective's voice, though calm, felt like a distant echo. "Carlos, this changes everything. We need to go back to those compactors, now." But my mind was already elsewhere, picturing the subtle differences in the waste, the meticulous placement of those bundles. The killer wasn't just eliminating a problem, they were sending a warning, and I had just read it aloud. The stale coffee scent clinging to the air in the temporary operations hub was starting to taste bitter on my tongue, a metallic edge that mirrored the tension gnawing in my gut. The detective, a woman whose eyes held a permanent shadow of fatigue, nodded slowly as I finished explaining. Around us, the low hum of computers provided a constant, almost hypnotic drone, occasionally punctuated by the crackle of a radio or the rustle of a colleague flipping through files. I leaned forward in the hard plastic chair, my palms sweating against my worn work trousers. "It's not just the trash itself," I reiterated, my voice lower now, more earnest. "It's where it isn't, the missing links, the specific types of commercial waste that should be there but aren't. Someone's pulling their waste streams from the usual collection points, diverting them." I pictured the routes in my head, the endless miles of bins and dumpsters, the subtle differences only someone who walked that path daily would ever notice. And the bundles, they weren't just thrown out, they were placed, tucked away, like they wanted them found, but not too easily. The detective steepled her fingers, her gaze sharp, unwavering. "A warning," you said. "Yes, a message. The specific packaging, the way it was arranged. It wasn't random. It felt deliberate, like a signature, but in reverse." I thought about the heavy, almost industrial-grade plastic sheeting, the precise knots, not the kind of stuff I just toss in a residential bin. And the areas where I've noticed these discrepancies, the patterns of missing waste. They often line up with less trafficked industrial zones, places where a commercial operation might have its own disposal methods, or where they could easily intercept their own waste before it hits our trucks. I paused, a thought clicking into place. There's that specific stretch near the cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation area, always surprisingly clean for its traffic, almost too clean. And the signal's always dead there, making it perfect for anything you don't want seen or heard. A colleague, a younger man with an intense stare, typed furiously at a nearby console. The detective gestured to him. Cross-reference that with the trace analysis from the materials Carlos found, the specific plastic, the fibers, and the geographical markers for the missing waste streams he's talking about. The air in the room seemed to thicken, a palpable shift from vague theory to concrete action. I felt a strange mix of vindication and growing dread. My insights, born from years of mundane observation, were suddenly a critical piece of a puzzle I never wanted to be part of. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed, casting a sickly yellow glow that made everyone look a little more tired, a little more desperate. I could almost taste the fear, a dry, chalky film on my tongue. Hours later, the detective called me back into a small, windowless office. The scent of disinfectant was strong here, trying to mask something deeper, more unsettling. "Carlos," he answered, his voice softer now, but with an underlying current of urgency. "Your observations, they've narrowed our focus significantly. The trace evidence from the bundles, particularly the specific industrial polymer found, matches materials used in a specialized manufacturing process. And the waste patterns you described align perfectly with a cluster of facilities in the old industrial park. One in particular stands out. They've got their own waste disposal contracts separate from the city, but the type of material, it's a direct hit." My heart gave a heavy thump against my ribs. A name, a specific location. It was no longer just a theory. "So you have a suspect." She didn't confirm directly, but the set of her jaw, the way her gaze hardened, told me everything. "We have a very strong lead, an area of intense interest, thanks to you." She pushed a small burner phone across the desk. "Keep this with you, and don't tell anyone you've been talking to us, especially not about this." The drive home was a blur of streetlights and shadows. The city, usually a familiar comfort, now felt like a sprawling, watchful entity. I tried to focus on the usual evening sounds, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of a bus, but my ears strained for something else, something out of place. My skin prickled, a phantom touch, as if someone were watching from the periphery. I pulled into my street, the familiar lamplight spilling onto my small porch. Everything looked normal, too normal. As I stepped out of my truck, a glint of metal caught my eye near my mailbox. It was a small, crudely fashioned bird made from twisted wire, stuck into the ground at an odd angle. It wasn't mine. It wasn't the kind of thing anyone on this street would leave. I bent down, the concrete radiating a cool dampness through my jeans. As my fingers closed around the wire, I felt a sharp prick, a single drop of blood welled on my fingertip. The wire was barbed, not just twisted but deliberately sharp. Ice flooded my veins. This wasn't a random piece of litter. This was a message. A silent, vicious warning left precisely where I would see it, where I would have to touch it. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. I looked up and down the quiet street. Nothing, just the sleepy houses, the parked cars. I went inside, locking the door, the click echoing too loudly in the sudden quiet of my home. My hands were shaking as I washed the small cut, the red swirling down the drain. The image of the barbed wire bird, sharp and deliberate, burned behind my eyes. They knew I was involved. My mind raced. This wasn't just about finding a killer anymore. This was about me, about my family. I had a choice to make, stark and immediate. Retreat, disappear, protect my child and let the police handle it from here, hoping they wouldn't connect the dots back to me. Or push forward, use what I knew, expose whoever left that twisted bird. The thought of backing down, of letting them win, tasted like ash in my mouth. I walked to the window, peering through the blinds at the seemingly empty street. I just hadn't realized it until now. The burner phone lay on the kitchen counter, a black rectangle against the chipped laminate. I'd placed it there deliberately, away from my work clothes, away from anything that felt like my life. But its cold presence still radiated through the air, a silent hum of unwelcome possibility. My child's drawings, taped to the fridge, usually brought a smile, a warmth that chased away the city's chill. Tonight, they just made the knot in my stomach tighten. Every penny I'd saved, every early morning, every late night, it was all for that future, and now this. I met the detective the next morning, not at the usual diner, but in a dusty, forgotten corner of an old municipal building, the kind of place where forgotten files went to die. Fluorescent tubes above flickered, casting the hallway in sickly green intervals. The air smelled of old paper and stale coffee, a scent that clung to the back of my throat. "Carlos," the detective said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of its usual clipped efficiency. He ran a hand over his thinning hair, his eyes heavy. We hit a wall, a big one. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I'd been expecting it, a part of me, but the confirmation still landed like a physical blow. What happened? The lead we had on the distribution network. It evaporated. Overnight, the warehouse was empty when we got there, cleaned out. Not a single print, not a stray fiber. The supplier we were tracking, the one the runner mentioned, gone, vanished. And the informant who gave us the initial tip about the specific drop point, the one with the information about the unique delivery method you helped us piece together, he's unreachable. His last known address is a vacant lot. It's like they knew we were coming. Ice flooded my veins. All that work, all that risk for nothing. The detective's words were heavy, each one sinking me deeper into a pit of despair. He leaned back against a filing cabinet, the metal groaning under his weight. "We've got nothing left to go on, Carlos. No new leads. No one else knows about this. We're effectively back to square one, or worse, because now they know we're looking." I felt the nausea twist through me. My child's face flashed in my mind. Then the image of the blood-soaked evidence I'd found. Was this all for nothing? Had I put everything at risk for a ghost hunt? My throat felt dry, the air tasting like rust. Maybe this was my out. Maybe I should just walk away, pretend none of this ever happened. But the image of the victim, the memory of the crime, wouldn't let me. "There's one last thing," the detective continued, breaking into my spiraling thoughts. "A long shot. We're investigating a series of communication blackouts, a strange pattern of signal dead zones popping up around the city. Our tech guys think it might be related to the burner phones, some kind of sophisticated jamming. They're doing a cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation out near the old industrial park. Purely technical, but it's the only thread left, however thin." The journey to the industrial park was a quiet one. The city faded into a landscape of forgotten factories and skeletal warehouses. We pulled up to a cluster of mobile units, antennae reaching for the overcast sky like desperate fingers. The air here was different, thick with the smell of ozone and damp earth. A low, persistent hum vibrated through the ground, a symphony of unseen machinery. Technicians in reflective vests moved with practiced precision, their faces grim. "They're trying to pinpoint the source of the jamming," the detective explained, gesturing vaguely at a large, boxy piece of equipment that pulsed with a faint blue light. "If we can trace that, maybe we can trace them." I walked alongside him, trying to make sense of the complex array of cables and monitors. My eyes, however, kept drifting to the periphery, a habit born of my own work. My gaze swept over the concrete pads surrounding the mobile units, the patches of overgrown weeds, the scattered refuse of a temporary worksite. Empty energy drink cans, discarded cable ties, a few crushed cigarette butts, Nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual detritus of human activity. But then I saw it. Tucked beneath the lip of a corroded metal utility box, almost completely obscured by a patch of stubborn bindweed, was a small, distinct glint. Not a piece of equipment, not a technician's tool. It was a fragment of plastic, a sharp, irregular shard no bigger than my thumbnail. My breath hitched. No one else seemed to notice it. The technicians were focused on their screens, their meters. The detective was scanning the horizon, looking for anything that seemed out of place in a criminal sense. But my eyes, trained for years to spot the anomalies in the ordinary, recognized something else. It wasn't just a piece of plastic. It was a fragment of a specific kind of plastic, the kind used in high-grade, disposable packaging, the kind that, in my experience, was often found in industrial settings where precision components were handled. But it wasn't the material itself that snagged my attention. It was the way it was broken. The fracture lines were too clean, too sharp, not the usual stress breaks from impact or crushing, and the iridescent sheen wasn't paint. It was a microscopic residue, almost like a lubricant, but with a peculiar, almost waxy texture I'd felt countless times before. I held it up, turning it in the light. This wasn't just packaging. This was from a seal, a tamper-proof seal, and the residue, my mind raced back to weeks ago to the initial discovery. The specific type of container the gruesome evidence had been found in, the way it had been sealed, the unique, almost industrial-grade adhesive, the feel of that seal when I'd first encountered it. This fragment, small as it was, bore the unmistakable signature of that same material, that same unique breakage pattern, that same subtle, waxy residue. The despair that had consumed me moments before evaporated, replaced by a jolt of pure adrenaline. This wasn't just a random piece of trash. This was a direct link. They hadn't just cleaned out a warehouse. They had been here, and they had left a trace that only someone who had handled their specific kind of waste, their specific kind of packaging, would ever recognize. I stood, the tiny shard clutched tight in my palm. The city might have felt like a sprawling, watchful entity, but it had overlooked something, and I hadn't. The fragment, small as it was, bore the unmistakable texture and faint chemical tang of the specialized adhesive. Not just any industrial-grade sealant, but the kind used in very specific applications, often for weatherproofing or securing components against extreme vibration. My mind, a database of urban detritus, flashed to the hundreds of times I'd encountered similar materials. It wasn't common, not for household waste. It belonged to the world of heavy-duty infrastructure. And then it clicked. The exact same type of sealant I remembered from a particular type of discarded casing I'd seen around the city's more neglected utility sites, places that were usually off-limits, or at least rarely frequented by the general public. Ice flooded my veins, but it wasn't fear, it was a jolt of pure, cold clarity. This wasn't just a clue, it was a fingerprint, a location. The way it had been sealed, the meticulousness, spoke of a need for absolute concealment, for something to withstand the elements, perhaps even the crushing force of a compacting truck. A cold dread settled in my stomach. This wasn't random. It was deliberate, and it pointed to someone who knew how to secure things. Someone with access to such materials, and perhaps someone who understood the pathways of urban waste as intimately as I did. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy. The detective needed to know, and he needed to know now. "It's the sealant," I practically shouted into the receiver, not even bothering with pleasantries. "The container, the original one, it's sealed with the same stuff they use around the cell tower maintenance sites. The old ones especially. The ones that get forgotten, that have signal dead zones." My voice was tight, urgent. I heard the detective's sigh on the other end, a familiar mix of skepticism and weary patience. "Carlos, we've been over this. Those areas are secured." "Not all of them," I countered, my voice rising. "Some are just out of sight, out of mind. I've seen them. I've cleaned around them. They're perfect for disappearing things or people." The last word hung in the air, heavy and metallic. I could almost taste the dust and ozone of those forgotten places. Think about it. Why use that specific adhesive? Why that meticulous sealing? It's not about hiding it from a neighbor. It's about hiding it from us, from the system, from the trash trucks, and that means someone who knows how our system works. A silence stretched, elastic, then the detective's voice, sharper this time. "Which sites, Carlos? Be specific." I rattled off a few locations, focusing on the ones notorious for their poor cell reception, The ones where the city's grid faded into forgotten corners. The ones where I often found myself wrestling with bags of refuse that seemed to have no owner, no origin. The detective barked orders into his own radio, his tone now mirroring my urgency. "We're on our way, stay put." "No," I said, already halfway to my truck. "I'm coming with I know those routes better than anyone. I know what's supposed to be there and what isn't." I didn't wait for an answer, just hung up and started the engine. The old diesel rumbled to life, a comforting vibration against the soles of my feet. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation and fear. I was stepping into something far bigger than any trash route, but my gut, my instincts, was screaming that this was it. This was where the pieces finally locked into place. The detective's unmarked car met me a few blocks away, and I followed him, navigating through the early morning city streets. The air was still cool, carrying the scent of damp concrete and exhaust fumes. We sped past familiar landmarks, past the very bins I emptied daily, a surreal feeling of chasing a ghost through my own territory. My mind raced, trying to anticipate, to predict. If I were hiding something, truly trying to make it vanish, where would I go? Where would I feel safest from discovery? Our destination was a cluster of rusted skeletal structures piercing the skyline on the city's outskirts. This was the site designated for cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation. This wasn't just a dead zone, it was a forgotten zone. We pulled up to a chain-link fence, partially collapsed, a sign long faded to illegibility. The ground was uneven, littered with discarded cable spools, cracked concrete slabs, and overgrown weeds. The detective's boots crunched on gravel as he surveyed the scene. "No easy entry," he muttered, but I knew better. "This way," I responded, pointing to a narrow path barely visible winding between two massive, derelict generators. "The old access road. We used to clean up here after storms." The signal dead zone was real, complete, something faintly acrid like old batteries and decay. Then I saw it. A faint trail, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye, leading away from the access path. It wasn't footprints, not exactly. It was a pattern of disturbed dust, a slight displacement of debris that only someone intimately familiar with the undisturbed would notice. It was fresh, too fresh. Recently, the detective nodded, his hand already on the grip of his weapon. My eyes scanned the area, my sanitation worker's instincts honed to spot the out of place, the discarded, the forgotten. And then, behind a stack of rusted barrels, partially obscured by a tattered tarp, I saw it. A glint of something too clean, too new in this wasteland of forgotten things. The wind sighed through the tower rigging, a mournful sound. As we rounded the barrels, the scene unfolded. A makeshift workspace, tools neatly arranged, and the perpetrator hunched over a crude table, illuminated by a single flickering lantern. He looked up, eyes wide with a desperate, trapped animal's fear. "It's him." I breathed, the words tasting like ash. The meticulousness, the specific adhesive, the knowledge of the city's hidden corners and the waste cycle, it all made sense. He wasn't just hiding evidence. He was processing it, breaking it down, trying to make it utterly disappear, using the very methods I understood so well. The perpetrator lunged, a desperate, clumsy move towards a hidden compartment. But the detective was faster, shouting commands, his weapon raised. I saw the glint of metal in the perpetrator's hand, but it was too late. He was disarmed, subdued, the struggle short and brutal. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm against the sudden, shocking quiet. As the detective cuffed the perpetrator, my eyes fell on the makeshift table. Bones, but not just any bones. These were small, delicate, arranged in a way that suggested a macabre reconstruction, a study in disintegration. And next to them, a small, intricate device, a miniature pulverizer. The motive then wasn't just to hide, it was to erase, to obliterate, to turn a life into dust, to be scattered and forgotten, absorbed into the city's endless waste stream. It was a terrifying, perverse form of ultimate disposal. My stomach twisted, nausea washing over me. I had been right. The silence pressed in like cotton in my ears, just as it had moments before. My own phone remained stubbornly dark, a digital brick, confirming the dead zone was real, complete. But the air, that something else now had a name, a metallic tang that made my stomach clench, a faint but undeniable sweetness underlying it that spoke of decay. Not the rot of forgotten garbage, but something far more sinister, far more deliberate. The detective, his face grim, gestured ahead with his own light. "This way, Carlos, just a little further." My pulse hammered against my ribs. We were deep inside the cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation site, a place I'd imagined as sterile, filled with humming machinery. Instead, it felt like an excavated tomb. The ground under my worn work boots was soft, yielding, not the packed earth I expected near heavy equipment. Then I saw it. A faint shimmer, almost imperceptible, just beyond a cluster of dense, low-growing bushes. It was a tarp stretched taut, camouflaged with branches and dirt. Too neat, too hidden. The detective didn't need to say anything. The way his shoulders tensed, the way his breath hitched told me everything. The fabric, heavy with dew, crackled faintly as it peeled back. The smell intensified, gag-inducing now. My throat tightened and I swallowed hard, the metallic fear coating my tongue. Underneath, a shallow pit had been dug, not wide but deep enough. And inside, not bodies, not directly, but fragments. Tools stained with that same coppery sheen. Shovels, pickaxes, all neatly arranged, almost displayed. And then I saw the ground itself, churned earth, still damp. Too much dampness for a place that hadn't seen rain in days. A thin, clear tube snaked from the pit's edge, disappearing into a deeper crevice. A drainage system. It wasn't an accident. They cut the signal, isolated this entire area to work undisturbed. To process things. He shone his light on the earth around the pit, and my skin prickled, aware. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just a disposal site. This was a processing facility, a grotesque hidden factory operating under the guise of cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation. My mind reeled all those weeks. The meticulous way the evidence was packaged, the specific type of waste, the calculated timing of the drops. It wasn't just dumping, it was an elaborate, terrifyingly efficient system. The little girl's shoe, the plastic wrap, the precise cuts I'd observed on the discarded materials, they were all pieces of this larger, horrifying puzzle. I had been walking among monsters, unknowingly, every single day on my route. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I doubted myself then, for a fleeting, sickening moment. Had I missed something bigger, something obvious? How could I have been so close, yet so blind? The detective's voice, now firmer, pulled me back. Your evidence, Carlos, it led us here. Every piece you found, every detail you reported, it all pointed to this operation. The specific chemical residue you identified on that plastic, the way the organic matter was treated. It was unique. We cross-referenced it with similar unsolved cases. This isn't just one local group. This is extensive. The air remained heavy, but now, mixed with the stench of decay, I could discern the faint, acrid smell of chemicals, industrial-grade cleaners, meant to erase, to sterilize. They hadn't succeeded. My eyes adjusted further to the dim light, and I noticed the texture of the soil, almost crumbly in places, like it had been repeatedly disturbed and then hastily covered. My boots squelched slightly as I took a step closer, the ground giving way with a soft sigh. Over the next few hours, the area swarmed with activity. Other figures, clad in protective gear, moved with practiced efficiency, their lights crisscrossing the site. The silence was broken by the low hum of generators, the methodical click of cameras, the hushed commands of the authorities. My hands, usually calloused and strong, felt weak, trembling slightly. The enormity of what I'd uncovered, the sheer scale of the evil, pressed down on me. Days turned into weeks. The cell phone tower maintenance, signal dead zone investigation site became a crime scene of national interest. The news buzzed with hushed reports, carefully worded to avoid panic, but the underlying horror was clear. Arrests were made, a network dismantled. My name wasn't splashed across the headlines. The authorities kept my involvement quiet for my safety, and I preferred it that way. But the detective, the one who'd listened, who'd believed, made sure I was recognized. One afternoon, a plain envelope arrived. No return address, just my name. Inside, a letter from a foundation dedicated to victims, expressing their profound gratitude, and a check. A substantial one, more than enough for my child's college tuition, with enough left over to finally fix the leaky roof on our small house, to replace the worn-out tires on my truck. It wasn't a reward for heroism, the letter explained, but a contribution to a cleaner future for those affected, a future made possible by the courage of ordinary people. I held the check, my fingers tracing the numbers. The paper felt crisp, solid, not just money but validation. A tangible representation of the lives I'd indirectly touched, the suffering I'd helped stop. My daily route, once just a means to an end, now felt imbued with a new purpose. I still picked up trash, still navigated the city's discarded remnants, but now I saw more than just waste. I saw patterns, I saw stories, I saw the potential for discovery, for justice in the overlooked corners of the world. The metallic fear had long since faded, replaced by a quiet resolve. My child would go to college. They would have opportunities I never did, and I would keep doing my job, but with sharper eyes, a keener sense of smell, and a deeper understanding of the hidden truths that lay beneath the surface.